I now give the floor to India for exercise of right of reply. India, you have the floor.
Mr. President, I take the floor to exercise India's right of reply to the statement made by the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Every word spoken from the podium of this august assembly, it is believed, carries the weight of history. Unfortunately, what we heard today from Prime Minister Imran Khan of Pakistan was a callous portrayal of the world in binary terms. Us versus them, rich versus poor, north versus south, developed versus developing, Muslims versus others. A script that fosters divisiveness at the United Nations, attempts to sharpen differences and stir up hatred are, simply put, hate speech. Rarely has the General Assembly witnessed such misuse, rather abuse, of an opportunity to reflect. Words matter in diplomacy. The invocation of phrases such as pogrom, bloodbath, racial superiority, pick up the gun, and fight to the end reflect a medieval mindset and not a 21st century vision. Prime Minister Imran Khan's threat of unleashing nuclear devastation qualifies as brinksmanship, not statesmanship. Even coming from the leader of a country that has monopolized the entire value chain of the industry of terrorism, Prime Minister Khan's justification of terrorism was brazen and incendiary. For someone who was once a cricketer and believed in the gentleman's game, today's speech bordered on crudeness of a variety reminiscent of the guns of Dara Adam Khel. Mr. President, now that Prime Minister Imran Khan has invited UN observers to Pakistan to verify that there are no militant organizations in Pakistan, the world will hold him to that promise. Here are a few questions that Pakistan can respond to as a precursor to the proposed verification. Can Pakistan confirm the fact that it is home to 130 UN-designated terrorists and 25 terrorist entities listed by the UN as of today? Will Pakistan acknowledge that it is the only government in the world that provides pension to an individual listed by the UN in the Al-Qaeda and Daesh sanctions list? Can Pakistan explain why, here in New York, its premier bank, the Habib Bank, had to shut shop after it was fined millions of dollars over terror financing? Will Pakistan deny that the Financial Action Task Force has put the country on notice for its violations of more than 20 of the 27 key parameters? And finally, would Prime Minister Khan deny to the city of New York that he was an open defender of Osama bin Laden? Mr. President, having mainstreamed terrorism and hate speech, Pakistan is trying to play its wild card as the newfound champion of human rights. This is a country that has shrunk the size of its minority community from 23% in 1947 to 3% today, and has subjected Christians, Sikhs, Ahmadiyas, Hindus, Shias, Pashtuns, Sindhis, and Balochis to draconian blasphemy laws, systemic persecution, and blatant abuse and forced conversions. Their newfound fascination for preaching human rights is akin to trophy hunting of the endangered mountain goat, the Markhor. Pogroms, Prime Minister Imran Khan Niazi, are not a phenomenon of today's vibrant democracies. We would request you to refresh your rather sketchy understanding of history. Do not forget the gruesome genocide perpetrated by Pakistan against its own people in 1971 and the role played by Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi. a sordid fact that the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh reminded this Assembly about earlier this afternoon. Mr. President, Pakistan's virulent reaction to the removal of an outdated and temporary provision that was hindering development and integration of the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir stems from the fact that those who thrive on conflict never welcome the ray of peace. While Pakistan has ventured to upstream terrorism and downstream hate speech there, India is going ahead with mainstreaming development in Jammu and Kashmir. The mainstreaming of Jammu and Kashmir, as well as Ladakh, in India's thriving and vibrant democracy with a millennia-old heritage of diversity, pluralism, and tolerance, is well and truly underway, irreversibly so. The citizens of India do not need anyone else to speak on their behalf, least of all those who have built an industry of terrorism from the ideology of hate. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of India for her remarks.
Je donne la parole au représentant.
I now give the floor to a representative of Pakistan.
Mr. President, I take the floor to exercise a right of reply to the statement made by the Indian representative. Her diatribe was a reflection not only of the deep-seated Indian hostility towards my country, but also reflected the Indian habit of conflating fact with fabrication. Mr. President, we were treated to another homily against terrorism. Listening to this exposition, one would indeed marvel at the credentials of the pontiff. For who would be more qualified to talk of terrorism than those who practice it as an instrument of state policy? The breeding ground of terrorism in our region are the RSS centers of fascism. The claims of religious superiority are perpetrated through state patronage all across India. Mr. President, speaking of victims of terrorism, I would like to remind the Indian representative of people like Danish Rajab, the 24-year-old from Srinagar, whose pellet-infested face, deprived of vision in the left eye, tells a story of misfortune that is not particular to him. The 10-year-old Asif Ahmed Sheikh seeks similar answers from those who have extinguished his eyesight. The Indian representative could have spoken of the agony of Farooq Ahmad Dar, who was tied to an army jeep and driven in front of unarmed Kashmiri protesters and used as human shield. Or perhaps Kaisar Bhatt, who was run over and killed by a military jeep. For a country where members from India's minority, including Christians and Muslims, are publicly lynched at the hands of Hindu zealots, where perpetrators of Samjhauta terrorist attack receive state patronage, where an unabashed Hindu extremist Yogi Adityanath, who openly advocates religious superiority of the Hindus, serves as the face of the largest Indian state, Uttar Pradesh, where right to citizenship to Bengalis in Assam is being arbitrarily rescinded and who have suddenly been made stateless and have been called termites by a prominent Indian leader, where churches and mosques are torched, is surely not qualified to give sermons to others. In illiberal India of today, there is no room for dissent. India's proclivity to violence is also no secret. In the last 70 years, India has been engaged in at least over a dozen instances of use of force and continues to face 17 domestic insurgencies. Mr. President, as for the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, I would urge the Indian representative, for once, to look beyond obfuscation and denial and to answer honestly and objectively a few simple questions. Can India deny the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, which is an internationally recognized dispute on which there exist a number of UN resolutions? Can India deny that the UN has expressly called for holding an impartial plebiscite to ascertain the wishes of the Kashmiri people? Can India deny that over 100,000 civilians have been killed in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which are well documented by human rights organizations and the international media? Can India deny that Indian military forces have resorted to indiscriminate use of force against innocent civilians, causing widespread death and injury? While Indian occupation of Jammu and Kashmir has little pretense to legitimacy, The true face of Indian occupation was exposed yet again by the recent report of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, which speaks of a litany of systematic violations of fundamental human rights of the Kashmiri people. Much as India may attempt, credibility cannot be gained by discrediting the truth, but instead by facing up to it. The truth, Mr. President, is that Jammu and Kashmir is not a part of India. It never was, it never will be. As for UN Security Council resolutions, they do not lapse with time or are overtaken by circumstance. Law has no expiry date. Morality has no sell-by date. Mr. President, India cannot hide behind semantics anymore. You can regurgitate hollow allegations of cross-border terrorism against Pakistan, but you cannot hide your egregious state terrorism against defenseless people in occupied Kashmir. You can brutally silence courageous Kashmiri voices like Shujaat Bukhari, but you cannot suppress the voice of the international community, articulated in the report of the UN High Commissioner. You can use the might of your guns to keep the innocent Kashmiris under your illegal occupation for now, but not forever. The 100,000 Kashmiri dead in occupied Jammu and Kashmir tell an unremitting tale of this Indian double-face. It is time for India to abandon its double-speak. Vacuous rhetoric and phony bravado may win you an election, but it cannot win you peace, or indeed earn India any credibility. I thank you.
I now give the floor to the representative of Qatar for a second